The winter of 1889 came down hard on the northern timber camps, the kind of cold that split skin and silenced men. Elias Crow knew that silence well. He lived alone in a hand-built cabin deep among the pines. A lumberjack by trade, a ghost by reputation. He spoke little, worked hard, and buried his grief in the sound of falling trees. His wife and infant son had been taken by fever years earlier, leaving Elias with nothing but scars and a loneliness so deep it felt permanent. One bitter morning, Elias rode into the frontier town of Red Hollow to sell timber. The streets were crowded, too crowded. Men shouted, wagons circled, and at the center stood a raised wooden platform. Elias smelled trouble before he saw it. An auction, but not cattle, not land, a human being. A woman stood on the platform, hands bound, a rough burlap sack over her head. Snow clung to the hem of her dress. A sign hung around her neck, scrawled in charcoal. No name, no family, no use. The crowd laughed. $2 starts it, the auctioneer barked. Elias felt something twist in his chest. He had seen cruelty before, but this was different. The woman stood perfectly still, not begging, not crying, just breathing, waiting. Bids came half-hearted. $1, $1.50. Mockery filled the air. Without planning to, Elias raised his hand. $2. The crowd fell quiet. The auctioneer blinked. Sold. Just like that, the rope was cut. The woman was pushed forward. Elias caught her before she fell. Up close, he noticed her shaking, not from fear, but cold. He draped his coat over her shoulders. I'm not buying you, he said quietly, cutting the ties. I'm getting you out of here. She said nothing. All the way back to his cabin, she stayed silent. When he offered food, she ate slowly. When he offered a bed, she slept on the floor by the fire. That night, as the wind howled through the pines, she finally spoke. May I tell you my name? Elias nodded. She lifted the sack. And everything changed. Her face was not what Elias expected. There were no marks of shame, no brokenness, only strength, intelligence, and pain carefully hidden behind steady eyes. My name, she said, voice clear, is Margaret Hale. The name struck. Elias like a hammer. Hale, the wealthy Eastern family that had once owned half the valley. The family rumored to have disowned a daughter for refusing an arranged marriage. Margaret told him everything. She had been betrayed, declared dead on paper, sold from town to town like property. The sack was to erase her identity. The auction was meant to erase her dignity. But Elias did something no one else had done. He listened. Days turned into weeks. Margaret worked beside him, learned the land, laughed for the first time in years. Elias learned that silence could be shared, that grief didn't have to be carried alone. One night by the fire, Elias spoke the words that terrified him. I won't keep you here if you want to leave. Margaret took his rough hands in hers. I don't want to be owned, she said. I want to belong with you. If you'll have me, not as a purchase, but as a choice. They married in the spring. No crowd, no witnesses, but the trees. Word spread slowly. When Margaret's past finally caught up to her, Elias stood between her and the world like an unmovable wall. The man who paid $2 at an auction became the man who gave her a life. And the woman with no name became the one who saved his soul. The past does not stay buried, no matter how deep the forest or how thick the snow. Spring had softened the land around Elias Crow's cabin, but it had done nothing to soften the men riding up the narrow trail one gray morning. Elias heard them before he saw them, hooves cutting into mud, leather creaking, the faint jingle of metal that did not belong in the woods. He set his axe down slowly. Margaret was inside, humming as she kneaded bread, unaware that the world she had escaped was about to find her again. There were 4 riders, clean coats, city horses. One of them wore a thin smile that never reached his eyes. Elias Crow, the man said. We're here for the woman. Margaret stepped onto the porch before Elias could stop her. She stood tall, hands steady, eyes clear. My name is Margaret Hale, she said. And I am not for sale. The man laughed softly. You were once, and your family would very much like you returned. Elias moved between them without thinking. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his weapon. She's my wife, he said, and this land doesn't recognize auctions. The men exchanged glances. The smile vanished. That night the forest felt smaller. Elias knew what men like that did when pride was wounded. He loaded his rifle and sat by the door while Margaret slept, or pretended to. Before dawn, the cabin burned. They barely escaped. Smoke rose behind them like a funeral prayer as they fled into the trees. By the time they reached the river gorge, Elias's shoulder was bleeding and Margaret's hands were blistered. The riders followed, relentless. At the edge of the gorge, with nowhere left to run, Margaret turned to Elias. "I won't be taken again," she said quietly. "But I won't let you die for my past." Elias shook his head. "You didn't choose what they did to you, but I chose you." The riders closed in. Then the forest answered. Men Elias had once helped. Loggers, trappers, a preacher whose barn Elias rebuilt for free. They came from the trees like a living wall. No guns raised, just presence, community, witness. The riders backed away. "Tell them," Margaret said, voice steady, "that Margaret Hale is dead, and that the woman who lives here belongs only to herself." The men left. The past retreated. Months later, they rebuilt the cabin, stronger, brighter. Margaret planted a garden. Elias learned to laugh again. And on a summer evening, as fireflies lit the woods, Margaret placed a small wooden sign above the door.